Previously on Sollace in Troubled Times.
We will be lucky if any of his cases go to trial before November.
Well, yeah, guilty! Guilty, yeah!
Trump's sentencing has been delayed.
He can't keep getting away with it!
This election will decide whether we have a future.
Feel better?
No. I want Trump in jail. He was convicted. We shouldn't have to wait.
The legal system is a slow thing. It's like watching a caterpillar eat a leaf.
What?
I mean, you watch it for a while and nothing seems to happen, and then you take your eyes away and look, more of the leaf is gone. And then you start wondering what kind of caterpillar it is. If it's one of those that's poisonous and will sting you if you touch it.
What the hell are you talking about?
Sometimes my metaphors get a little fuzzy.
Like a caterpillar.
Sorry I brought it up.
My worry is he's rich. Which is bad because if you're rich enough, you can get away with any damn thing.
True, and the Supreme Court, which is controlled by deeply corrupt Republicans,
Are there any other kind?
has been doing everything they can to help him delay his cases and keep them out of the public eye until after the election. It's ironic.
What's ironic?
The case that got him convicted, the so-called hush money case, is not about the hush money so much as it is about the fact that the money was paid in order to influence the 2016 election by preventing damaging information about Trump coming to light.
I can't imagine anything more damaging about Donald Trump than the fact that he is Donald Trump.
Well put.
But why is it ironic?
The whole point of delaying the cases is to influence the 2024 election by preventing damaging information coming to light, namely Trump's innocence or guilt.
He's guilty.
Yes. Over the years we have put up with a lot of corrupt behavior by our presidents, but we finally got one of them convicted.
The United States has gone to great lengths to avoid prosecuting former presidents. Richard Nixon avoided prosecution for his many crimes thanks to a pardon by his successor, Gerald Ford. The next Republican president, Ronald Reagan, sold weapons to Iran and used the money to fund a terrorist army in Central America, but it's unclear how aware he was of this, and in any case all participants were pardoned by his successor, George H.W. Bush. The next Republican president, George W. Bush, started an illegal war against Iraq, but got away with it because the Obama administration didn't want to prosecute. Trump is the first person to commit so many crimes before, during, and after his occupancy of the Oval Office that the legal system couldn't just let it slide.
And yet the Republicans want him to represent them in another presidential election.
Every time the Republicans have had a chance to get rid of Trump, they have protected him instead.
For God's sake, why?
Trump attracts a block of 9 or 10 million highly motivated violent fascists. GOP leaders have reason to believe that without him they wouldn't get those votes.
But they might get more votes without him.
Possibly. There's a lot of different Republican voters. Conservative independents too embarrassed to call themselves Republicans. Never Trumpers are always looking for an excuse to come back home. They would keep the Trump-curious voters, and the ones who abhor Trump's boorishness but vote for him to get standard GOP policies, the voters Roy Adroso calls just the tip Trumpers.
Ew.
Yes, ew. The thing is, they'll lose votes and they'll gain votes, but they're betting the loss would be bigger than the gain. Without Trump voters, Florida and Texas go purple.
I don't believe that will ever happen.
I have my doubts as well, but my point is there's nothing the GOP fears more than competitive elections.
Except Trump.
I stand corrected. The only thing they fear more than competitive elections is Trump and his followers. Like I said, Trump attracts 9 or 10 million violent fascists. A few Republican representatives who voted to reject the 2020 election results have, off the record, said they did so out of fear for their physical safety and that of their families.
They're the ones who invited these people into the party. They brought it on themselves.
Well, yes, but that's why even Republicans who know better take his side when they claim that putting former heads of government on trial is a banana republic thing.
Is it?
It's true that poorly managed, corrupt states with weak governments often put defeated leaders on trial. However, the actual historical record shows that stable, developed nations with rule of law will put former heads of government on trial if those individuals are believed to have committed crimes.
So it does happen.
Oh yes, consider France.
Je le fais souvent.
In January 2017, a French weekly newspaper published allegations that a woman named Penelope Fillon had been hired for a government job by her husband. This weekly, called Le Canard Enchaîné, is sort of what you would get if The Onion did investigative journalism on the side. The allegations were serious enough that it prompted an investigation into her husband. Penelope Fillon's husband is François Fillon, a center-right former prime minister. In 2017, he was a candidate for president. Early in his political career, he had hired his wife to be his parliamentary aide. After he was appointed Minister of Social Affairs in 2002, she kept her job as aide to his successor in Parliament. Naturally, this was very good for their household income.
He hired his wife? That's suspicious as hell.
It definitely smells of nepotism, but in France it's perfectly legal to employ family members as long as they do good work.
Did his wife do good work?
No, in fact it appeared she did almost no work at all and collected hundreds of thousands of euros in salary during that decade. He also hired 2 of his kids as lawyers for a couple of years, but the kids were still in law school and were not yet practicing lawyers.
That sounds not good.
It wasn't. Fillon was investigated for fraud and forgery and he lost the election.
Good.
In 2020, he and his wife were tried, convicted, and sentenced to prison.
At least the French seem to know how to take care of corrupt assholes. How long was he in prison?
Well,
He didn't go to prison, did he?
Fillon is appealing.
Not to me.
No, he's appealing his case, and while the appeal is underway, he's free. He might follow in the footsteps of another corrupt French Prime Minister, Alain Juppé, who received a suspended jail sentence for fraud.
Suspended. So no jail time.
No jail time. Voters forgave him, and in 2016, Juppé made a very competitive run for the presidency and almost got the nomination.
He got away with it.
Oh, not at all. He was barred from holding public office for a year and had to restart his political career. It was a decade before he could make another run for the presidency. Ironically, he lost the presidential nomination to Fillon.
The guy who gave his wife a no-work job?
The very same.
And here I thought the French had it together.
They were able to obtain convictions for fraud.
I hope Trump is convicted of more things. I want him convicted for the coup attempt. Did the French ever have a coup attempt?
A few. A coup in 1958 replaced an old constitution with a new one. Back in 1851, the President of France, a nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, led a coup against the Republic and won.
And if you win, you don't face trial.
No, you don't. After the 1851 coup, the president became emperor and ruled for almost 20 years. But he was actually a fairly smart politician, unlike Trump. You want someone more like Trump, try Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil.
Brazil is an amazing country. A Portuguese colony for 3 centuries, it actually became the capital of the Portuguese Empire for a few years. Like the United States, it has been the beneficiary of immigration from all over the world. Like the United States, it's a federal republic. And like the United States, its president attempted to overthrow the government after losing re-election. In 2018, far-right politician Jair Bolsonaro ran for president on a pro-gun, anti-abortion, capital punishment, and privatization platform. His opposition to women's rights and LGBT rights won him the support of social conservatives. He won the nomination of his party and promptly remade it in his image. With promises to fight crime and control corruption, Bolsonaro won the presidency. As president, Bolsonaro often clashed with others in his government and with his own party leadership. Many ministers left his cabinet, and Bolsonaro himself left his political party. His popularity declined after his first year. When the COVID pandemic came to Brazil, Bolsonaro downplayed the crisis. He accused his opponents of exaggerating the danger represented by the virus. He rejected masking and was suspicious of vaccination. As the 2022 election approached, he joined a centrist political party and claimed, without proof, that the voting system was vulnerable to fraud. Following his defeat on October 30th, Bolsonaro did not concede, but his chief of staff stated that Bolsonaro had authorized a presidential transition. On the penultimate day of his term, December 30th, he went on vacation in Florida. A week and a half later, on January 8th, a crowd of his supporters attacked government buildings in the capital in an attempt to overthrow the new administration.
That's so Trump.
That's so Trump, it's like, how much more Trump could this be? And the answer is none. None more Trump.
Even the coup attempts were almost on the same day of the month.
Right. Anyway, Bolsonaro went back to Brazil in March. In June, he was barred from running for office for 6 years. Earlier this year, the failing New York Times reported that his passports had been confiscated.
He's a flight risk?
Apparently. There's also allegations that before the election he met with military leaders and proposed a coup.
So they've got him.
Maybe. He hasn't gone on trial yet, but it's not looking good for him.
So he's not in jail either.
No, but getting a head of government indicted and tried is a pretty big deal. I told you about France. Now let me tell you about Taiwan.
Taiwan is a large island off the coast of China. It was annexed by China in 1684, seized by Japan in 1895, and returned to China in 1945. Though part of China, it retains its own semi-presidential government. Taiwan has a long tradition of indicting former presidents. Lee Teng-hui, president from 1988 to 2000, ended 40 years of military rule of the island in his first term and oversaw the transition to a competitive democracy. Sounds like a great guy, but a decade after leaving office, he was indicted on charges of embezzlement. He was acquitted, the state appealed to the High Court, and he was acquitted again.
Another Taiwanese leader, Ma Ying-jeou, served 2 terms, but after leaving office he was indicted for leaking classified information.
Did he steal boxes of secret documents and hide them in his bathroom?
No, he apparently leaked information from a wiretapped conversation. In May 2018, Ma was sentenced to 4 months imprisonment, but before the year was over, Taiwan's Supreme Court ordered a new trial, and in July 2019, Ma was acquitted.
Okay, so other countries are good about convicting corrupt leaders. Why can't we do that with more of ours?
We think we're special. American exceptionalism is a hell of a drug.
What even is that, American exceptionalism?
It's a belief in American uniqueness. Every country is unique, of course, but according to American exceptionalism, America is uniquely unique. The pinnacle of human history, the dwelling place of all things good.
But we also gave the world Donald Trump.
Which puts the lie to American exceptionalism. Trump's crimes are without number.
If we go by charges, I think the number is 91.
Actually, 3 charges were dismissed in March, so the number is 88. Appropriate, considering 88 is a neo-Nazi code.
Is it?
The 8th letter of the alphabet is H, so 88 stands for HH, which stands for Heil Hitler.
Oh my God.
In any case, American presidents do occasionally get a slap on the wrist. Remember Bill Clinton. The vast right-wing conspiracy against him and his wife did manage to catch him perjuring himself in a civil case unrelated to the initial investigation.
Oh, that's right. He was impeached for that, wasn't he?
Impeached but acquitted, he still ended up disbarred, unable to practice law for 5 years.
Not that he needed to.
No, he was always going to be fine, what with his pension and his book deal and his speech fees. It's easier for ex-presidents to dig themselves out of holes than for the rest of us. Why, even Richard Nixon died a respected elder statesman.
Trump will never be that.
No, the one good thing to come out of the Trump administration, the super-fast development of the COVID vaccine, is something he can't talk about because it alienates his minions.
Well, I'm depressed now, and I blame you.
What?
You've shown me that presidents almost never go to jail. Those guys from France and Taiwan and Brazil got away with it, no jail time.
Then let me tell you about someone who did go to jail. Let's look at Taiwan again.
After Lee, but before Ma, Chen Shui-bian was the first opposition leader elected president in 2000. He won re-election in 2004, but 2 years later his family became embroiled in scandal. His son-in-law was arrested for insider trading, his wife was indicted for corruption, and he himself was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in her corruption. He was saved from indictment only by the immunity conferred by his position as president. It just doesn't seem like a good idea to give national leaders criminal immunity. Anyway, the charges shocked the nation and led to a crushing defeat for his party in the 2008 elections. An hour after Chen left office, on the 20th of May, he was arrested and barred from traveling overseas. A few months later, he was jailed. Despite claims that the prosecution was politically motivated, the prosecution went forward, and in 2010 he was sentenced to prison. Due to his fragile health, he was released on medical parole in 2015, and in 2021 he became a podcaster.
A podcaster?
Well, a radio host.
He should have started a YouTube channel.
No one should start a YouTube channel, unless they know how to get people to like, comment, and subscribe. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, you're too weird.
How can you say such a thing?
I know you.
Nobody knows me. I'm like the Sphinx, silent and mysterious.
And missing a nose.
Anyway, there's also the example of Israel. Ehud Olmert was dogged by suspicions of corruption throughout his career. He became prime minister in 2006, but resigned in 2009 when investigations took a serious turn. He was tried for fraud, tax evasion, and other crimes, and in 2014 was convicted of bribery. He went to prison in February 2016 for 1.5 years.
Now, if Israel could only do that with the current guy.
And then there's South Korea, which has enthusiastically pursued charges against corrupt leaders.
Han Myung-suk, South Korea's first female prime minister, had been a pro-democracy activist during military rule. She was elected to the National Assembly in 2000 and appointed prime minister in 2006. During her time as prime minister, she accepted illegal political donations. In 2015, she was tried and convicted and spent the next 2 years in prison. Lee Myung-bak, former CEO of Hyundai, won the 2007 presidential election and served as president until February 2012. A few years later, enough evidence of bribery and embezzlement came to light for authorities to seek his arrest. In October 2018, he was convicted and sent to prison. He was pardoned in 2022, at which time he was 81 years old and in declining health. Lee's successor, Park Geun-hye, is South Korea's first female president. In October 2016, it came out that a friend and unofficial advisor, Choi Soon-sil, had been soliciting donations from business conglomerates and writing speeches for President Park. Choi was charged with fraud and abuse of power that November. By December, there was enough damning evidence of Park's involvement that the National Assembly voted to impeach her. In March 2017, she was convicted and removed from office. At the end of the month, Park was arrested for bribery, coercion, and leaking state secrets. The following year, she was sentenced to prison. In December 2021, she was pardoned and released.
Boy, those South Koreans don't mess around.
No, they do not. South Korea and Taiwan have both experienced corrupt presidential dictatorships, and they do not wish to experience it again.
I hope we don't.
That remains to be seen. Conservative Americans are not fans of democracy. The Washington State Republican Party recently denounced democracy.
Doesn't surprise me in the least.
Conservatives opposed democracy even before they were all gathered under the Republican banner. In 1965, the vast majority of congressional opposition to the Voting Rights Act came from conservative representatives and senators from the old Confederacy.
You said a long time ago that all those southern states were single-party states.
Yes, with the exception of Reconstruction, when federal troops enforced voting rights, and the late 20th century, when conservative voters were switching their allegiances from the Democratic Party to the GOP, the former Confederate states have been single-party states.
Republicans want to do that to the whole country.
Yes, they do. That's why this year's election is so important.
Wouldn't imprisonment stop Trump? Are there any people who became presidents or prime ministers after time in prison?
Actually, a number of people have been jailed and then gone on to lead their countries. I can think of 3 off the top of my head.
Jawaharlal Nehru was born into a wealthy household in the British Raj in 1889. As a teen, the historical example of Italian unification and the contemporary example of Japan's victory over Russia led him to embrace Indian nationalism and the promise of a unified India free of British rule. When Mahatma Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement in 1920, Nehru joined in. Nehru and his father were jailed the following year and released a few months later. When World War II began in Europe, Nehru, a Democrat, supported the Allies. However, the fact that the British had pulled India into the war without consulting Indians sparked protests. In 1940, Nehru helped launch a program of civil disobedience that led to his arrest and imprisonment. He was released in 1941 and imprisoned again in 1942 after calling on the British to quit India. The British released Nehru in June 1945, by which time they were ready to withdraw from India. A constituent assembly was elected in 1946, and Nehru became head of the interim government. In 1947, with full Indian independence, he became Prime Minister of India. He held this post, winning 3 elections with substantial pluralities until his death in 1964. Lech Walesa was a Polish electrician when he first ran afoul of the authorities. Walesa helped organize protests and strikes which the government suppressed with violence. At the time, the early 1970s, Poland and its Eastern European neighbors were Soviet puppet states. Despite pretensions to socialism, these governments ruled as single-party regimes which permitted no independent labor unions. Throughout the decade, Walesa involved himself in independent union activities and was arrested on several occasions. By 1980, public pressure compelled the government to recognize an independent labor union, Solidarity. The union was broadly popular. It drew on public resentment of Soviet domination, government-backed discrimination against the Catholic Church and other religions, and poor handling of the economy. Walesa became Solidarity's leader in 1981. The strong popularity of the union threatened the government's legitimacy, however, and at the end of the year the government instituted martial law. The state outlawed the union. Walesa was jailed for 11 months. After his release, he continued to promote the outlawed union despite being under state surveillance. He was arrested for questioning several times. The efforts of Walesa and others kept Solidarity alive. In 1988, he organized strikes that led to negotiations with the government in early 1989 and elections that summer. To the surprise of both the government and the union, Solidarity won nearly every seat for which it was allowed to compete. This shattered the communist hold on government, and in 1990 Lech Walesa was elected president of Poland. While Walesa was a young dissident in Poland, Czech playwright Václav Havel experienced the 1968 Prague Spring, a time when the Czechoslovakian government launched a program of liberalization that angered the Soviets. The USSR and its puppet states invaded Czechoslovakia and purged reformers from the government. Havel had been on the side of the reformers, and his voice was heard on the radio supporting resistance to the Soviet invasion. The immediate consequences of the government's fall were dire for Havel. He was banned from the theater. Suddenly, he was a full-time political dissident. As a dissident, Havel spoke out against the puppet government, criticizing it for failing to live up to the human rights obligations in the national constitution. The state would not tolerate this criticism, and in 1979 Havel was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. After his release, he was under state surveillance. Havel was jailed again in January 1989 after participating in public protests. The protests continued, and Havel's imprisonment became one of the matters about which people were protesting. The government released Havel after only a few months, by which time the world was changing swiftly. In June, elections in Poland delivered a decisive defeat to the Polish government. In August, Hungary dismantled its border defenses separating it from Austria, and thousands of Eastern Europeans fled to the west. Then, in November, the Berlin Wall fell. Dissidents in Czechoslovakia, led by students, actors, and theater workers, including Havel, called for a general strike. Demonstrations in Prague grew larger, peaking at 800,000 on November 25th. On the 27th, 3/4 of the country went on a 2-hour general strike. The next day, the Federal Assembly deleted the Communist Party's privileged role from the national constitution. On December 29th, Václav Havel was elected president of Czechoslovakia, an amazing turn of events for a man who, just months before, had been in jail.
If you're paying attention, you may have noticed what these people have in common.
They were the real deal.
What do you mean?
The orange turd keeps calling his indictments political prosecutions, even though they're not, right?
Right.
But the guys you were talking about, they were real political prisoners.
Yes, they were. Sollace and Havel were imprisoned by Soviet puppet governments and Nehru by a British colonial government.
But they weren't criminals, right?
Their political activities did technically constitute crimes.
I mean, they weren't lifelong charlatans pitching leathery steaks, tacky shoes, and signed Bibles with the Constitution in the appendix.
The Nehru jacket was popular in the 1960s, but he wasn't hawking them, no.
And they hadn't tried to overthrow a democratically elected government on live TV.
No, they were in fact agitating for democratic governments.
Then are there any examples of someone attempting to overthrow the government, going to prison, and then becoming a president or whatever?
Well, there is one, but I'm going to have to change some names so I don't violate Godwin's law.
In the 1920s, the country of, Fredonia had some economic problems. People looked for someone to blame, and for someone to do something about those someones. Inspired by Benito Mussolini's fascists and their successful march on Rome 2 years before, a man named Mr. Hilter got hundreds of his followers to capture some of the men in charge of the state government. However, a lack of coordination gave police time to mobilize. Mr. Hilter was arrested 2 days later and charged with treason.
Hilter? Who are you kidding?
Myself, chiefly. I guess you know who I was talking about.
Yes, I do.
Was that obvious?
Yes.
I was trying not to violate Godwin's law.
I think I read that Mike Godwin said it was okay to compare the American alt-right to Nazis.
In that case, I will. The Trumpist attack on the Capitol on January 6th was the American version of the beer hall putsch.
Except nobody arrested Trump for that, and now, even as a convicted felon, he's a bigger threat than ever.
Yes, you might say we screwed the putsch. Or not.
Hitler got arrested after attempting to overthrow the government, but Trump walked.
Trump walked because he was president when he attempted his coup.
Yeah, but what does it say about us that we didn't jail Trump an hour after he left office?
Nothing good.
The 21st century has shown that the apparent stability of American political institutions has relied not on the strength of its constitution and its laws, but on people with differing political goals and beliefs operating in good faith with one another. This is how politics still works among the various factions of the Democratic Party, with all the attendant victories, defeats, and frustrations that come with compromise and negotiation. The Republican Party, however, is no longer interested in negotiation and compromise, cannot accept its defeats, and does not operate in good faith. The party that has portrayed itself as the party of law and order is now headed by a convicted felon. The party that claims to support law enforcement now threatens to defund the Department of Justice and turns its back on policemen who defended the Capitol on January 6th. Convicted felon Donald Trump's cult of personality has turned the Republican Party into a racket run by gangsters. In speeches, Trump has compared himself to Al Capone, boss of the Chicago Mafia in the early 20th century. Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, was lawyer to Fat Tony, the boss of New York's Genovese crime family. Crime is in Trump's DNA, and now it is in the GOP's. The gangster view of the world is that of the grift. Following norms, respecting laws, and working hard is what suckers and marks do. There are no contracts, there is only what one can get away with before meeting resistance. All relationships are transactional, and nothing is respected except raw power. Americans like to think that America is exceptional, that it cannot fail, that its government cannot fall into tyranny, where citizens can be oppressed by the raw power of the state. But tyranny has been part of America from its beginning, with the institution of slavery shaping the 1789 Constitution. A gangster state would simply create a tyranny that would encompass everyone. People who support Trump do so because they are angry that they are being asked to respect people whom they believe deserve no respect. But if Trump returns to the White House, they'll find they receive no respect either. His administration will be run like any other criminal enterprise. Organized crime operates not through the strength of a capable boss, though that does help, but through fear and the threat of violence. If they get their wish, Trump's voters will find themselves enfeebled, disrespected, and afraid. In an authoritarian state run by thugs, bullies, and thieves, no one, not even the most eager and willing lackeys and minions, will be safe, because, as the old saying goes, there is no honor among thieves.
Yep.
I'm up, just getting dressed.
Okay. Your brother sent up room service. Eggs, bacon, cereal, orange juice. With pulp, unfortunately.
You don't like pulp?
No, if I wanted an orange, I'd eat an orange.
Oh, stop complaining and chew your juice. Ugh.
What happened? You okay?
Yes, it's my skin.
Did you get stung the other day?
No, it's just dry.
Can I ask you a personal question?
You may.
Are you a vampire?
What?
I mean, you're very pale, and you don't like sunlight.
I have a skin condition.
I know. Vampirism. I mean, you're white for a white person. I've never seen you eat because you eat alone.
I eat alone because I take off the mask.
Or maybe you're drinking blood. Let's see how you feel about the Holy Bible.
That's not a Bible, that's Shakespeare.
Okay. How about sacramental bread?
This is Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Yes, but I blessed it by reading a verse from...
From As You Like It, it seems.
I know, I'm just pulling your leg. Go get your breakfast.
Honestly, sometimes I think you wind me up just to feed on my irritation.
In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover. A savage place as holy and enchanted as ere beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift half-intermitted burst huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks at once and ever it flung up momently the sacred river, 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion. Through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And amid this tumult Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air. That sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, "Beware, beware!" Her flashing eyes, her floating hair. Weave a circle round her thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for she on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise.